Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize in Literature, and the writers I know were either horrified or overjoyed. I am in the latter group, a tremendous Bob Dylan fan. Everyone who loves Dylan loves him for his or her own reasons, and enumerating those reasons seems beside the point. After all, Dylan doesn't need the Nobel to prove his lasting cultural importance. What's interesting about this Nobel pick is the question it raises: can music be literature? My favorite comment about Bob Dylan's Nobel win came from the poet Matthew Zapruder, who, in response to people complaining that Dylan is not a poet, wrote on Facebook, "Okay, I agree it's not poetry, but it's not the Nobel Prize in Poetry." Is Bob Dylan a poet? No, I don't think so. But is his work literature? Yes, absolutely. And literature is what the Nobel Prize is for. His body of work adds up to some of the central literature of our time, and that must include the music that accompanied his lyrics, since lyrics by themselves are not poetry. There is a common sense that poetry exists in a world of pure language, but a poem is, in fact, both the music and the words. Poetry's sonic aspects, such as syllable sounds, rhyme, rhythm, assonance, dissonance, and meter, are meant to accompany the content, to set the mood, to refer to and elicit a sensory experience related to the emotions and images of the poem. They also refer back to the long history of language, echoing sounds and rhythms of the past, placing poem in tradition and history, linking it to a timeless tradition. Dylan's lyrics alone don't compare to a poem, but a complete song. Words, music, arrangement, instrumentation, all of it taken together does. Now, this thesis introduces some complication. Does song mean a particular performance, a recording of a song, or even musical notation? The abstract idea of the song performed. For now, let's presume we are speaking of song records, which, like books, sit on the shelf and are more or less fixed in time. Dylan's lyrics are more poetic techniques than practically anyone's. But they are not poems because without the music to back them up, they don't have that depth of reference and history that qualifies them as literature. But if Dylan's lyrics aren't quite poems, they are pretty damn close. For example, take the first verse of Desolation Row, a song that is really a catalogue of literary allusions. The first verse goes like, "Cinderella, she seems so easy. It takes one to know one," she smiles, and puts her hands in her back pockets, Bette Davis style. And in comes Romeo, he's moaning, "You belong to me, I believe. And someone says you are in the wrong place, my friend. You better leave." And the only sound that's left after the ambulances go is Cinderella sweeping up on Desolation Row. This is a song written in what the poet Lucy Brock Broido would call long-haired couplets, long lines that rhyme in groups of twos. This verse is obviously rife with allusion, and Cinderella and Romeo meet up here, and Ophelia, Robin Hood, and a host of other famous characters come up later in the song. As in the best contemporary poetry, Dylan mixes ancient and modern. Cinderella meets Bette Davis, the quotidian, back pockets, ambulances, and elevated Romeo, and the kind of memorable one-liners that lyrics need to be instantly apprehended. You better leave. But Dylan's got more than allusions and a sense of how words register. In his late masterpiece, Not Dark Yet, a song about facing mortality, Dylan writes, "I feel like my soul has turned into steel. and I've got the scars that the sun didn't heal. A steel soul is a powerful metaphor for the deadness that comes with age and loss. And if we want to get more technical about it, steel here is an objective correlative. T.S. Eliot's fancy term for an object that signifies an emotion. The cold, unreflecting, inflexible metal, if you conjure in your mind, is that makes you feel lonely and tired. That's the stuff of poetry. His music is equally literally. Dylan's source for the forms, styles, melodies, and even chord changes of his songs are hundreds, if not thousands, of years old. He's always been an unparalleled interpreter of traditional songs, even as he's deeply innovated song forms. Perhaps the greatest technical innovation comes in lengthy tirades like Desolation Row and Idiot Wind, paradises of repeated verse, chorus verse, structures that reminds me of nothing so much as the epic poems of Homer. Those poems were cast in rhyming stanzas so they could be transmitted orally over generations before they were written down. Dylan saw a new use for that old form, soltering it to folk and blues based music. Homer catalogued the heroes and villains of ancient battles. Dylan does the same with the tropes and myths of the changing times. If Seamus Heaney, himself a Nobel laureate, sourced his voices and rhythms to predecessors like Keats and Yeats and Wordsworth, then Dylan finds his in Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie, as well as the writings of his contemporaries, the Beats, who were influenced by Blake and Whitman, and the jazz musicians of the 1950s and the 60s. And of course, just as Dylan was inspired by the writers of his youth, so have most of the writers of the last half century been inspired by Dylan. His fingerprint is everywhere in literature. Dylan is like Homer in another significant way. His anonymous sources in the deep history of folk and blues mirror the influences of the ancient poet, who may or may not have been one writer, but who doubtlessly grew together the Greek myths to the form of the Iliad and the Odyssey. No, Dylan isn't a writer of literary books, but perhaps no living artist has shaped the American soul or plumbed its depths as profoundly as Bob Dylan. And what's literature for if not that?